Good morning or good afternoon, should I say, by the time you'll be viewing this webinar. Thank you very much for joining me, and my sincere apologies for the delay. We've obviously had some technical difficulties, but as I mentioned in the email, when there's a will, there's most definitely a way. So I hope you're able to watch this webinar at a time that's convenient for you. Do feel free to reach out to us over email or even phone call once you've watched if you've got any questions, if you've even got any feedback as to what you'd like to see in the next webinar. Or any critiques on any of the dad jokes or the terrible puns and analogies I throw in as well along the way. So thank you again. You've joined today's webinar, which is for PXT Select, our latest and definitely one of my most exciting products, and I'm very happy to be launching that to you today. So PXT Select, I'll tell you a lot about that in more detail, but what I wanted to do is to ensure that we draw it back to the purpose and the reason why PXT was launched in the first place, and that is really a few different reasons. One is to aid recruiters and HR professionals in the selection process, but the other is obviously the direct impact and the correlation that has on your company's bottom line, the power of retention within an organisation, and obviously the power of engagement. So we'll dive into a little bit of that in detail a little bit further ahead. But first of all, let me just introduce you to both myself and to Jenny, who will be the Client Services Manager. So briefly, a little bit of background on me. I've been in the recruitment industry for quite some time now. I've joined Integro probably about 6 weeks ago now, so only quite fresh. But I've been at Indeed.com prior to this for about 4 years. And prior to that, I was recruiting for Wheat Cinemas, amongst a few other roles in HR. I'm excited to be bringing this product to the market because there's not anything quite like it out there as far as bringing everything all together. And I'll explain a little bit further in the webinar as to what I mean there. So I'll be one of the two key members at Integro who's got the exciting opportunity to launch PXT. The other is Jenny Wall. She joins the PXT team, having previously been one of the key members and responsible for facilitating and organising and driving adoption of both Everything Disc and amongst other products of ours, 5 Behaviours namely. So briefly looking into the reasons why we want to drive PXT adoption across the market, something very exciting to me is really the simplicity of the product. You'll figure out throughout this presentation exactly how easy it is to use. There's obviously the human element there. The driving force behind why PXT will be so successful is that it's human forward. And lastly, smart. We'll have a look a little bit later as to the technologies that PXT has adopted to make it more user-friendly. So first of all, to kick us off, just a bit of an agenda for the day. We're going to briefly have a look at job fit. So the reason why this is important is you want to make sure that your role has the best candidate matched to that role. We're going to have a look as to the positive impact of ensuring job fit. We're then going to dive into the converse little piece there, which is the cost of a bad hire. So, you know, you're unsuccessful for whatever reason it might be in finding somebody who's well suited to that role. What's that going to mean to your organisation? We'll take a little bit of a look at that in numbers and particularly in dollar figures. That's quite a stark realisation once you see that. And lastly, the reason why we're all here, PXT Select. So we'll have a look at the suite of reports and also the assessment itself. So to kick us off, job fit, we'll have a little bit of a question out to the audience, which unfortunately, due to the fact this is recorded now, we won't be able to have any interaction. So you'll have to bear with me through the painful silence of this dad joke. What's something that Elon Musk, Jacinda Ardern, and Sir Alex Ferguson have in common? It's not money. What it is that they are all very, very well suited to the role that they were hired for. The best predictor we found of success, according to a Harvard Business Review study conducted of over 360,000 individuals over a 20-year period, was that job fit is the #1 predictor of success in a role. As I said, 360,000 interviews, 14 different industries. That's a pretty impressive figure, and it paints a picture really as to why job fit is important to both you and your organisation. How would you define job fit? So Christoph Brown defines job fit as the person, defines job fit as the compatibility between individuals and the job or tasks that they perform at work. This is something which probably won't shock a whole lot of you, but definitely there's importance in revisiting this a little bit here. So according to the Corporate Executive Board report, only 5% of companies feel that they have a best-in-class hiring practice. Too often, I think decisions are made on impressions, that the old halo effect, as I'm sure you're all familiar with. They have a good resume, they might interview very well, confidently. They may even get along with you on a personal level. But decisions aren't often made through data. A question to you would be, if you were to be honest with yourself, is the hiring process in your organisation currently, or in your clients' organisations if you're consulting, do you think that their processes are best in class? That's something to maybe ponder as we go through the presentation. So next we're on to the cost of a bad hire. You've seen some of the benefits of ensuring job fit, but if we're unsuccessful in finding that job fit, what is that going to cost your organisation? And perhaps something else to ponder here for you. How many new hires have you regretted, or have you considered to be somewhat of a bad hire? You know, it's a safe space. Feel free to definitely, ponder on that one, think on that. But the same study that we discussed just prior from Harvard interviewed hiring managers and found that 1 in 5 new hires were considered by the hiring manager to be bad or to have been regretted. So briefly here, we've got some financial costs. I know that you'd be all aware of those, but some of the data behind that is pretty overwhelming. A study from The Australian, quoted in the Business Review of Australia, revealed that a bad hire can cost a business up to 2.5 times the salary of the employee. What are further financial costs to a business? Recruitment advertising, obviously not a cheap game to play in. Hopefully we can help you there. Staff time on the recruitment process, it can be quite a lengthy process. I've heard of 3 to 6 months depending on the importance of the position. Salary payments, obviously, one of the most obvious ones there. Education and training, so once the person has been hired, what resources are you dedicating to ensure that that person is onboarded in your organisation? The cost to rehire, so once that person's either voluntarily or via forced conversations has been asked to leave the organisation, what is that eventual cost of rehiring that individual? And then in the rare instance that it is taken via the legal route, what are those legal costs? Further to that, we've got the non-financial costs. These include the impact on your team culture and team morale. I've seen firsthand how a bad hire, somebody who's not well suited to the role, can have a direct impact on those around them. Decreased productivity goes hand in hand with the impact on culture and morale, and that's not just for the person who is the bad hire in question. It can be for those people around them that they're having the impact on as well. The flow-on effect for that, the byproduct, would be dissatisfied customers. If you've got somebody who's not quite happy in the role that they're doing, what effect do you think that is going to have with the conversations they're having with clients, both internal and external? The frustration, again, both the hire and their peers. This could lead to turnover, not just with that bad hire in question, but I've seen instances where people within a team, within an organisation, are frustrated and concerned over the fact that the bad hire situation is not necessarily being dealt with, and so it can lead to a residual turnover as well. And lastly, obviously, the negative impact on employer brand. So the National Business Research Institute, just a little fact here for you, I found that 37% of companies who reported bad hires claimed it negatively impacted their employee morale, and over 18% claimed it had impacted on the client relations. The global cost of a bad hire, according to the Global HR Research, indicates that 39% of businesses reported decrease in productivity due to a bad hire. So we've discussed a bit about bad hires, but that's, I guess, one extreme of the spectrum. Then on the other end, you've got somebody who's perfectly well fitted or suited, shall we say, to the role. But what about those who lie in between? Someone who's not necessarily a bad hire, but might be a little bit more on the mediocre side of things. Is this the kind of person that you want working in your organisation? I think that's a question you should ask of yourself, because the mediocre hire can often have the same impact and same effect on the organisation. A loss of morale, management time, trying to coach and guide that person on their way toward being someone who's prime job fit, and even an impact on your culture. So really, I suppose at the end of the day, what we're all looking for here is a high performer. How can we work towards having an organisation of high performers? And hopefully we can help you there with PXT. So a question again to you all, being the experienced recruitment and HR professionals that you are, none of the information I've gone through would be news to you, but there is a reason you've obviously joined the call. So we've seen what the problem is so far as job fit, but what is the solution? Our friend here, Tim the Toolman Taylor, might have a bit of an answer for us, I think. We're talking tools, we're talking more power. So PXT Select, let's dive into that in a little bit more detail. But I'm going to briefly go through the assessment, the experience on the candidate side of things, the types of questions that they might be asked and what they can expect, but then also the suite of reports. So PXT will go through in detail, but it is one assessment that unlocks 13 reports. So what I would like to show you when we send the email out is there's an orientation video. So just prior to the candidate sitting through the assessment, they'll have a 2-minute video which will give them a complete understanding as to what they'll expect in the assessment. It's a really good way for them to be onboarded into the assessment. It's great for employee or candidate experience, and hopefully it will lead to more effective and true results. So again, keeping in line with the simple, human and smart, this candidate video will really tick a lot of candidate boxes. I will send that out to you afterwards. If you've got any questions, do let me know. But for now, let's have a little bit of a chat about the assessment process itself. I know you would have all seen this quote previously, but just for the sake of reading it out, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. So the reason I have this quote in the presentation is it makes me think of what we're trying to achieve here. If a candidate is deemed to fall outside the job fit threshold, we're not saying that they're not fit for any job within your organisation, but simply they're not suited for that specific role. Their fit for the job will impact their enjoyment personally, their passion, and their engagement with the role, which has significant flow-on effects to your organisation and the team, which we've gone through just previously. So we really want to help the proverbial fish find its ocean, and this is how we're going to go about that. So potential trumps experience. It's quite common for potential employees to be approached, the old tap on the shoulder for the skills they've acquired in the past experience that they've had, but not necessarily for the potential. How can we measure potential is really what we want to figure out. How might they be suited to a role that they perhaps have not even dipped their toes in before? So the way that they will do that is what we've got here. You've got traditional predictors of success. These really are measured by current processes, which is your resume and your interview process. So they're the technical skills of the role, the knowledge of the job, and then their work experience and history. But we really want to bring this into the 21st century. Recruitment can be somewhat of an outdated process from my experience working with a number of clients across a number of industries, and we really want to update that and make sure that we're providing the candidate with the best experience first of all, and secondly, that candidate is well suited to the role that they're being hired for. How do we do that? We measure thinking style, behavioural traits, and interests. Just a little side note here, an example that we have internally actually at Integro, only very recent. One of my colleagues was interviewed for a particular role. She then completed the PXT assessment, and what the results indicated was that while she might have been suited for that role, there was another opening that she was perhaps even better suited for. So that really helped to facilitate a conversation in the next interview. There were some interview questions which we'll go through that the report suggests in order to draw out ideas, examples as to some areas that she might be both interested in, but then obviously thinking style and behavioural traits will really complement. What it ended up meaning was that this person was hired for the different role to what they had applied for. It was a real success story because she's gone on to absolutely nail it in the role. And it's indicative as to hiring for potential rather than experience, because she'd not previously had experience in this role type. So let's dive into the assessment itself. So the process currently, as most recruiters will see it, will be a resume screening, a background check, or an interview. Really is probably more suited to the standard process. And so where does PXT fit in amongst all of that? We definitely don't want to say it replaces these, because we want to complement and supplement. Really, PXT should be accounting for about a third of your recruitment process. Wherever you choose to input PXT is up to you and your organisation. I would generally advise that you'd screen the resume first, perhaps have a first interview, and once you've narrowed down to a shortlist, that's a prime opportunity to put them through PXT Select assessment. So next, we really want to have a look at exactly what makes up the performance models or the jobs that we measure their assessment results against. And so that's what we'll dive into in our next slide. The performance model is accessed, or the performance model library is accessed via an easy platform that we have. For those of you who've used DISC before, it's similar to Epic. There's a broad range of job categories. These are templates that have been based on people who've been successful in those jobs prior. Thousands of successful employees were surveyed. Essentially, there were themes drawn from their answers as to an indicator what a best performer or a top performer might look like, which we have then collated into this job library, and you've got a prime example as to what job fit would be. There are a substantial amount of research behind PXT. For the more data-driven of you, I will definitely be able to send you out a research report if you would like that later on. So please feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to do so. But just a little bit of background here. So essentially, the studies are based on the Department of Labour databases, significant case studies. As I mentioned, over thousands were assessed. So once you've had your candidate complete the assessment, what you then do is select the job that best aligns with the position that you're hiring for, which can then validate your candidate for selection. So really how PXT works is we want to figure out what's required for the position. That's your performance model. If you're hiring for a sales role, we've got a number of sales performance models. You'd match that which is best suited for your company and your role. You then want to have a look at the measure of the candidate's thinking style, their behavioural traits, and their interests. And I know that you all love a Venn diagram, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at where these two intersect. What that then gives you is job fit. We'll go into some of the reports in more detail, but what that'll give you an indicator as to whether or not the candidate is well suited for the role. So let's take a bit of a closer look here. How exactly does PXT work? We want to first determine what is required for the job to make an excellent fit. We then look at the data of high performers. And so what that data looks like is the following. We measure thinking style. So the cognitive section of PXT is essentially something that asks participants to fill in multiple choice questions in 4 areas of knowledge and reasoning. So as you can see here, verbal skill. This measures vocabulary. Respondents are asked to identify synonyms to words. You've got verbal reasoning next. So this really just measures the ability to use words in reasoning and problem solving. And so respondents will complete analogies, essentially. Then numeric ability and reasoning. And yes, I'm talking maths, I'm talking algebra. Numeric ability refers to the measure of numeric calculation. Respondents will be asked to use numeric formulas to perform calculations. Next is numerical reasoning. which measures the ability to use numbers as a basis in reasoning and problem solving. So essentially the candidates or the respondents will perform calculations to solve numeric problems. Now I understand that not all roles will require maths. That was my first thought when obviously I first started having the conversations with Integra about PXT. But the study behind it, the science behind it, has really proven that when we measure numerical ability and when we measure numerical reasoning, it's a good indicator, a good yardstick as to the candidates or the respondents' ability to problem solve, which is obviously a core skill and requirement in a number of different positions. And so that's why we measure this. So next we want to dive into behavioural traits. The behavioural section of PXT asks participants to agree or disagree with statements of work-related preferences and behaviours in 9 distinct areas. Those areas you can see listed above. Now, in order for a breakdown for each of these behavioural traits, I'm conscious of time, and I know that each of you have some very important recruiting and HR decisions to be making, so I won't go through them in detail. What we do have is a report guide that will break down each of these 9 in substantial detail and will really give you an idea as to what we measure and why. So on to our third and final, which is interests that we want to be measuring. So this asks participants to rate their level of enjoyment of various activities to measure the degree of interest in these 6 broad categories based on the Department of Labor's occupational interests. Essentially, what do they get excited about? So in a nutshell, PXT looks at thinking style, behavioural traits, and interests. So what next? We want to have a look at adaptive testing, which is really, I've mentioned it a little bit prior, but it's what has brought PXT into the 21st century. Sorry, excuse me here. So what is adaptive testing exactly? Adaptive testing is the response, the calculation, of responses as the candidate answers their questions. So in a nutshell, when candidates answer a question at perhaps an easy level, if they get that question correct, the system adjusts accordingly and will then increase the level of difficulty onto medium, then onto hard, and then very hard. And so it really is a test which will be unique per candidate. No 2 candidates should experience the assessment in the same way. And for that same reason, no 2 assessments will have the same time allocation needed. So they aren't timed so far as you don't have a minimum to complete the assessment. There's also not technically a maximum either. The candidate will be able to log in and out as best suits them and their work style. And so what it'll mean is the average is around about an hour, but if they set aside that, they should be safe. So I just want to have a look at really what are the advantages of adaptive testing? Why have we applied this to PXT when a number of competitors aren't taking advantage of such progressive technology? And the first is simple. So it is 100% online, which means that the candidate can take it anywhere, anytime, and it will be really something that fits into their lifestyle rather than having to change for the role, which is important. When it's such a candidate type market, we really want to be making sure that it's the best experience for them and we give them every reason to want to be working for your company. Next is human. So it's a better assessment experience for the candidate. Adaptive testing is essentially, as we said, something that adjusts according to their answers, be it correct or incorrect. So if somebody's getting a couple of answers wrong, we don't want to then dial it up to 100 hypothetically, and they'll then get frustrated, obviously, with the difficulty of the assessment. We want to be adjusting according to their answers. And last is SMART. So it's a more accurate measure. How is it a more accurate measure? Is that most assessments are based on a model which is you go through chronologically 1 to 100, let's say. But given that this adjusts, what we've found is adaptive testing measures the upper and lower echelons of a person's ability, which most standard test formats do not. So diving into it a little bit here, we adaptive test on cognitive and behavioural, but we don't on interests. So everybody gets the exact same questions questions, sorry, on interest, and that's purely because it's a personal thing rather than something to be measured against as far as their ability. So just to recap here, we've had a look at job fit and why we should be working towards a candidate that is well fitted, well suited for the role. We've had a look at the converse negative impact of the cost of a bad hire. We've then dove into what the assessment looks like itself and the experience from the candidate's perspective for PXD Select. So next, lucky last, I think perhaps the most important of today's presentation is the suite of reports. Why does it matter to you? So as I mentioned before, it is only one assessment, which is a benefit from the candidate side. As I've seen a number of our competitors offer, a plethora of assessments. I've seen up to 16 for some of them. Obviously, you don't have to be using all of those 16, but I know from experience that a number of those assessments will be sent out to candidates. It can be quite daunting. And as I mentioned just prior, in a candidate type market, we really want to be giving the candidate every reason to go for your company. So from your side, you get a suite of reports all included in the same cost of that one assessment. My favourite thing personally is that it is far more than just selection. Aside from that, we'll have a little bit of a look into the other benefits here, which is the participant reports and the onboarding and development. We'll have a look at what each of these mean in a little bit more detail now. So first of all, you have your selection reports. These reports essentially are aimed at guiding your selection decision, your hiring decision. And as I discussed prior, they should account for about a third of that decision, taking into account the candidate's resume and then their interview and how they go within that. Next, you've got the participant reports. So these are really aimed at providing feedback, useful feedback for the candidate, whether they are successful or unsuccessful in the interview process. And again, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail coming up. And lastly, onboarding and development reports. So there's a suite of these ranging from coaching reports through to a two-sided report, which is both for management and employee. It's important to be able to manage up and for the employee to understand and feel safe to have a conversation with their manager. This report is aimed at guiding and facilitating those conversations. So we'll call that just one of the selection reports here for you to give an idea as to some of the exciting content within. Once you take the assessment, you'll have the ability to generate any of the reports mentioned just prior for no additional charge. So we will start with a comprehensive selection report. And if you bear with me through another painful analogy, I like to think of it as a Swiss Army knife. So it is one tool that offers you so many different solutions. So if you just join me on page 1 here, the introduction sets the context for what's included in the report. It gives you a high-level summary of 3 sections. You can then see what the performance model is. Our intention here is to offer a report so simple to digest that you can pick it up for the first time with limited or even no background on it and still interpret the results with great aplomb. At the bottom of the page, there is an easy to understand explanation of distortion. It's a question I've been asked many times now, with the ability for candidates to Google, the ability to even perhaps lean on relatives and friends. We want to make sure that it's the most accurate gauge of their performance. The tool, is very, very smart, far smarter than I am in that it's got a number of algorithms and safeguards implemented, which is aimed to catch out distortion. So it's only measured in the behavioural scales because we know some candidates may not answer in a way that is candid. So you can see here that the example candidate, Oliver, his report didn't detect distortion. For the most part, you really shouldn't have to deal with this. It is very rare from our experience. The tool has been around for over 20 years in overseas markets. So we picked up, according to our research, only 2% of assessments taken have actually had distortion flags. So you really shouldn't be seeing this. But for those where you do, we ask that you use at least a few of the interview questions at the end of the report to try and probe a little bit more as to the areas where distortion was flagged. Let's take one of the key behavioural traits, for instance. What you'll be provided with at the end of the report is a question to really call out on personal experiences as to this key behavioural trait, which will really help to identify, was it just, I guess, an inadequacy in the data, or is it a true idea as to whether or not they're being truthful? So next, if you join me on page 2, this is a great page to have a look at, to receive, a quick glance as to the fit for the performance model. We see the ranges of the performance model here and their overall fit. We then see their fit according to each of the 3 measured areas, both thinking style, behavioural traits, and interests. So those 3 roll up to overall fit. They are measured by the following: 40% weighting given to thinking style, 40% to behavioural traits, and lastly 20% for interests. So in thinking style, we see the broad categories of verbal and numeric skills and reasoning, and the desired ranges of where Oliver Chase falls within the range. This information rolls up to a composite score. The results summary for the behavioural traits, as you can see here, are demonstrated in a range with neutral endpoints. We'll find more detail later in the report that looks like the following, as you can see. So for behavioural traits, PXT select scale names have changed slightly to incorporate very neutral names on any given scale. If you want to highlight changes specifically, what was once energy is now pace, for instance. What was once judgment is now judgment. And these are the changes that have been applied since Profile XT, then migrated across to PXT. And for those of you who are unaware, just a little bit of background on that, Wiley actually acquired Profiles International, which was a company that's been around for over 20 years. So the reason why it is such a, I guess, a well-founded tool, given that it's only just launched in Australia, is it really has been around for over 20 years. Wiley acquired Profiles International. They updated some of the psychometrics behind it, brought it into the 21st century. They then added adaptive testing to this, and that is what we now know as PXT. So as you can see in the interest section, all 6 are shown in order as to the rank for Oliver specifically, who is our example candidate here. And if there are ever ties within those interests, those are noted. If you don't see anything tied, that's because there was no tie there. So next, what is a really useful tool for you is, given that there are 13 different reports, it can be quite daunting, I suppose, for some to figure out what reports are best suited for me. And we really want to provide you with as many tools as possible to gauge exactly that. The premise of Simple, Human and Smart being the simple portion of that is that we really want to bring as much information as possible into as easy to digest manner, so that way you don't have to spend time sifting through things that aren't necessarily relevant for your organisation. And so that's what we've done here in the report guide. It's a summary of what each of those reports entail and how those might be useful for your organisation. You can then make an educated decision as to whether you want to press ahead with using those once a candidate's completed the assessment. So we will send out an email after this webinar, as I discussed. We will attach a report guide so you can have a look through that. If you do have any questions, both myself and Jenny will be able to answer those. But the report guide is fairly informational and easy to digest. So hopefully it answers all of the questions that you might have. So just looking briefly here at a quick fact, Brandon Hall released a study looking at cost of a bad hire on an organisation, and found that organisations that lacked the standardised interviewing process were 5 times more likely to make a bad hiring decision. Why is that important to you, you might ask? And that's where we dive into the following here. The participant reports. So irrespective of whether you hire the candidate or not, have you ever been asked by them how they feel they performed? Have you wanted to provide honest or constructive feedback and perhaps not really felt equipped with the tools to do so? In steps, the participant reports. This is where this really comes into its own. So the individual's feedback report focuses on just the candidate without the position information. Like the other PXT Select reports, the individual's feedback report has guidance and interpretation built right into it, starting with an explanation of what the assessment actually measures. The report's written in a very friendly and neutral way and speaks directly to the individual about their assessment results through narrative feedback. The reason we do this, obviously, is we want it to be a positive experience for them, whether you hire them or not. We discussed the power of employer brand before, and for me, there would be no better experience, aside from getting the job, obviously, than having the phone call with the hiring manager or the recruiter and requesting feedback and having been greeted by this following that. That's some really, really important areas for them to work towards, some areas for development. And whilst they might not have been well suited for the role at this point in time, by providing them with such a positive experience, one conducive to personal growth for them, it really will keep them open to potential future opportunities within your organisation. So it interprets the results for the participant to eliminate the potential for misunderstanding about the results, what the results mean as well. So on to our next question, which will lead into our final report, the importance of effective coaching. What do you think the cost of disengagement might be, and how could coaching potentially be a solution for that? So a staggering 87% of employees worldwide are not currently engaged. Companies with highly engaged workforces outperform their peers by 147% in earnings per share, which is quite a significant figure. And then lastly, Gallup estimates that actively disengaged employees cost the US 483, far more substantial than 40, to $605 billion per year in lost productivity, which is an eye-watering figure. All of these figures and facts can be found in the Gallup survey for 2017. So it does bring us on to the last of the reports. I'm sure you're all ridiculously engaged individuals yourself, but can the same be said for everybody that you work with within your organisation? Doesn't have to just be one of your impending potential new hires. It could be current employees, and that's the beauty of PXT, is it can be used across the organisation as a whole. The challenge is often not identifying the problem per se with engagement, but rather how do we go about then re-engaging them? We know that they're not engaged, but what is that solution? So some of the benefits of effective coaching include obviously improved employee productivity, improved retention, and lastly, the impact on engagement, which has a substantial impact on your organisation itself. What does this report all look like, and what am I banging on about, I suppose? So the report for me is one of my favourite as far as having the greatest impact on your organisation. You can hire a candidate and get them into the position. Does that mean, even if they're the right job fit, that they're going to be effective within your organisation? Not all the time. What we need to do is be having these constant conversations, coaching conversations, how we can help the candidate feel supported, how we can provide a trusting and open relationship. And then really this tool is aimed at facilitating those conversations and providing the manager with the tools to do so. And in my experience, somebody might have the core skills and the traits required to be an effective leader, but they might not necessarily know when to call on each of those skills, or might not have received formal training in order to sort of step up into that leadership role, or even somebody who might have been a leader for quite some time. This tool really benefits all. So what does it aims to do? It aims to provide narrative feedback about an employee, and it's addressed to the manager rather than the employee themselves. So as you can see in the familiar results summary, it includes results from all scales, cognitive, behavioural and interests, and compares those scales to the performance model. This is the only one of the onboarding and development reports that shows the full assessment results in the results summary page. So once we get into the body of the report, you'll see detailed information about the example candidate here for the composite score scale in the thinking style section. It's the only thinking style scale we can go into detail for in the report. It also includes bullet points for what you need to know about the employee as it relates to the particular scale. Then there's management tips, which for me personally is my favourite section. Again, this is what I was referring to just prior, which is aimed at ensuring the relationship is a very fruitful one, and that candidate has all the tools they need to go and be the most effective for your organisation. Lastly, as you can see, right at the bottom of the report is the bottom line. I know that we've titled this webinar "The Impact on Your Bottom Line." That wasn't for no reason. It is very important to make sure that your employees, as I said, feel well equipped. This line really provides you with a brief summary, a snapshot of what is entailed within that page of the coaching report, and key takeaways and action points. So closing it all up, we've gone through the selection reports within the tool. We've had a look at the participant reports and how they might be useful for candidates, be it a hire, an eventual hire, a current employee, or even somebody who hasn't actually received the job offer. And lastly, onboarding and development. So it really is one assessment, one cost, and that unlocks a suite of 13 reports. I hope you found this a useful webinar. I hope you've taken something out of it, aside from the fact that quite clearly it's my first webinar that I've done for Integro. Somewhat nervous, bear with me. I will definitely make sure that we have growth and improvement for following webinars. I'll dip into those coaching reports myself a little bit, I think. So thanks very much for your time. Please feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to have a chat with you, as is Jenny, my esteemed colleague here. Thanks very much for your time.